We'll see if anybody. I thought. Oh, Matt and Jess are here. They just got here. Yeah.
Teresa and Nicole are on.
What?
Teresa and Nicole are on.
Okay. That's the weird part. Is I can't see who's on. I wonder if I can do that from my phone or from my tablet. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Teresa. Hey, Nicole.
Nicole said, I can see and hear you now.
Okay. Hey, Teresa and Nicole, I need you guys to let me know how my sound is. We're playing with new stuff, trying to get away with some of that robot chatter that we've had the last couple weeks.
Did you find an issue or?
No, just a total different thing. This afternoon did some reading.
Yeah. So I never liked it, but this is good.
So, you know, OBS is that program that runs your stream key and everything. We found an app you can put on your phone that will, over Wi-Fi, link it to OBS. So you can just use your phone as the whole recording device, which would cut out all wires we've got run back and forth. And yeah, then you can just move it anywhere, you know. And supposedly you can hook up multiple phones using the same app. What's that?
What I think it is, you can't. It's not for me.
Teresa said the sound's good. Nicole said a little bit spotty in sound, but not
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, I got it pulled up here.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll see how it holds up. We're trying something new. And both of you have my number or messenger. So if you want to,
Matt, did you remember yours?
okay. Brandy's texting.
I was worried you didn't.
Terrible at taking medicine. That chemo pill that I have to start, 4 pills in the morning.
Okay, we'll see how we do.
I'm like, you want me to text you?
And everybody online, if you don't,
It's so organized.
it may get better when it's quieter in here. We're almost ready to get started.
Since I was 5 years old, I take medication.
Just so everybody online knows, you're missing out on jalapeno cheddar, sourdough bread, and brownies.
I mean, I don't take any meds anymore, but yeah, I do take herbs now.
All right.
Even if I'll put the reminder on and then they'll set the alarm, I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And then I can still forget.
Okay, let's get started. If you're joining online, text or Facebook message me if you have any questions or comments or want to jump in at any time. Or if you're in the app, you can certainly comment in the app or on Facebook or YouTube as well. But however you want to throw in comments, I should be able to catch those. Let's pray before we start, and then I would bless the food, but it's brownies, and I don't think you can bless brownies. I think it works like that. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the way you've made us, the way you've wired us. Our desire is to be whole people, integral people. Integrity means to be whole and complete. And so we want integrity. We want to be able to use and access every part of us that you've created. And more than that, we want to be able to use it to connect to other people and to build true relationships where we can flourish and grow closer to you. So if in any way this talk can help us to do that, we'll need your spirit. And we ask you to come and lead and guide us in this. And so let this time glorify you and draw us closer to one another. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, I'm going to do a quick recap of what we talked about last week. I know I kind of sprung this on everybody, so not everybody had time to prep and be here last week. And the recording was so awful. If you made it through it, bravo to you. It had that. We've been fighting with that kind of digital sound overlaying a lot of our recording. We've been trying to track down. So we talked last week about this concept of cognitive dissonance, this idea that your brain doesn't always get along with your brain. And scientists have kind of tracked down that we call our limbic cortex, the part of our brain that houses our emotions and kind of our more rudimentary functions, is completely separate and oftentimes functions completely separately from our cerebral cortex, where our logic and reasoning and language are, which is why it is completely possible to really want a big greasy cheeseburger and want to lose weight at the same time, because you have two brains that want two different things, and they don't always get along. And we found that when those two don't get along, it's this thing called cognitive dissonance, where your brain is not matching up with your brain, and it's actually distressing. It raises your cortisol levels and actually has a real stress feeling, to the point that if someone has like a core fundamental worldview deep in their limbic cortex, part of who they are, and you give them data and evidence to the contrary, which only happens in the cerebral cortex, it is almost impossible for them to change that worldview side of the limbic cortex just with data alone. They call that, a paradigm shift, and scientists claim a person can get one of those, maybe two of those a lifetime. They don't happen often. It's probably what we would call a conversion, what we would call getting saved. When something happens so big that literally shifts your limbic cortex into a whole new worldview. And it's so powerful and big when it happens. Scientists say you don't shift that very often. So once someone's really locked in to a core worldview, it's pretty tough to change their opinion, which is why I gave up arguing on Facebook, because I was positive. My reasoning was so solid. There's no way it's deniable. And then, I started studying this stuff several years back and realized that you can never, especially once they begin to defend that worldview, they go into that, this is hurting me, the idea of you changing that part of me, actually, now this is in the kind of subconscious deep level, so it's not like thinking this rationally, but it's like they're going, this is hurting me at such a deep and fundamental level that I am now ready to defend that and fight so you can't change that. And it's really hard to change somebody's opinion once they're in that place, which is why, debating almost never changes anything. You might win a point, but you don't change people. That's just not really how it works. And so part of the power of being whole or being integral is getting your limbic cortex and your cerebral cortex to agree. And there's some really cool stuff on discipleship, how discipleship happens. which is primarily in relationship. We found not very many people really change who they are in terms of discipleship by through just information going in. They do it by building a relationship and feeling connected and starting to answer those questions. What do my people do? And that's like this fundamental question we ask, like, who am I and what do my people do? And it happens in the limbic cortex like 6 times a second, they say, to find yourself in the space you're in. Because actually we think of it as consciousness, like we always know who we are, but your brain has actually got a loop going, oh, the data changed, who am I in this moment, and what do my people do? Oop, the data changed, who am I in this moment, what do my people do? Because the world is changing. With every little change, your brain has to regroup and go, okay, I'm still the same person. I still know who I am. I still know what my people do. And so they say that happens in the limbic cortex like 6 times a second. But the big thing that we're talking about when it comes to relationships is emotions, because our emotions happen in the limbic cortex, which is totally separate from our cerebral cortex, which is where our thoughts and logic and reasoning happen. And so we have this tendency to feel like something happens, we reason it out, we feel what's appropriate to feel. So, someone makes us angry, we go, well, that wasn't appropriate for them to do that, and then we get angry. Which we've now found that the cerebral cortex, like I say, fires at least 6 times a second, or the limbic cortex, and the cerebral cortex happens at the speed of language. It happens at the speed you can formulate words, is how fast it is. So the limbic cortex is infinitely faster than the cerebral cortex. So what's actually happening is somebody does something and you feel something about it. And then your brain goes, why did I feel that? Oh, I feel that because they did this. So we script a narrative to match what we just felt. And the feeling actually comes first, which is a little weird to us because we like to think we're mostly rational creatures. We're mostly the ones steering the ship here. And come to find out, feelings are something that happen to us. They're not something we choose. They're what's there. And so, so the problem with that is, anybody ever felt something that they don't even know why they feel it? Like, and somebody's like, why are you so upset? I don't know, I'm so upset, And that's cognitive dissonance. When your limbic cortex is doing something, your cerebral cortex doesn't know why, it's distressing and it causes physical stress on the body. And so part of what we're doing is talking about how to process the emotions that happen to us in a way, which means to give them language, because there is no language in the cerebral cortex, which is why telling someone to calm down when they're stressed out never, ever, ever works. But sometimes a hot bath does, because something in your body goes, nobody takes a hot bath when the world is falling apart. And so when you're in a hot bath, your limbic cortex is like, I must be in a place of peace, because nobody lays in a hot bath when the world is falling. And so that somehow speaks to the limbic cortex in a way, or breathing easy, or a hot tea, or whatever, things that you don't do in a high stress moment. Tell your limbic cortex, this must not be a high stress moment because I'm doing a calm thing. Whereas telling someone to calm down does not work because there's no language there, which is strange. So part of what we call this is emotional intelligence, is the like phrase for it. We all know that intelligence is a thing that grows. It's a thing we facilitate. We have a certain level of capacity, maybe, but we expand that by learning more, by learning new things, by stretching ourselves, arguing, debating, getting new ideas. And obviously, the more intelligent we become, the more capable we become. We can now do new things and go into new places and accomplish new things. And learning to process, in other words, give language to a name and recognize our emotions is what we call emotional intelligence. And it can grow the same way mental intelligence can. We get better at it, and the better we get at it, the more things we can do, the more things we can access, the more engaged we can become, and definitely the more connected we can become with other people. So our goal here is to grow in emotional intelligence, meaning to understand and give language to our emotions, And so, everybody tracking with that so far? It's and so what we talked about last week is really the 5 core emotions that, and did everybody get an emotion wheel? I was going to pass them out. I said I would send these out, and I forgot to, so here's your emotion wheel.
Disgust.
What that?
Disgust.
Disgust, yeah.
I mean, from the movie Inside Out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if anybody ever seen Inside Out?
It's great.
That's like crazy real psychology. It is like deep, yeah.
I saw that they're actually using that with kids.
Oh, they have to be.
Yeah.
They have to
help
be.
them with
It's real.
in therapy sessions.
Yeah, it's real like neurobiology. Yeah, it's a kid's cartoon. It's cute too. It's adorable, but there's like crazy real psychology in that.
Like the actual emotions, you see them.
So the emotions of characters, so it's playing out this little girl, but it goes to her brain where she's got these 5 emotions.
You're freaking out my limbo.
It's really cute.
I don't know how to feel.
It would have been 5 minutes if they showed how to just stuff all of them into a bottle.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
A little girl and emotions and okay.
Yeah.
Part of-
So in your emotion wheel, we've actually broken it out into 8 core emotions. The 5 are colored, and then but we use 8 when we process, and I'll explain that a little bit. And the reason they say there's only 5 core emotions is because they have identified 5 parts of the brain that light up when you feel emotion. If they're doing a brain imaging scan and they make you feel angry, they can now identify 5 distinct points, and only 5 points so far, that light up when you feel an emotion. And so they now know that those happen in the brain, and they happen in specific regions of the brain. And they can, and in animals, they can actually put an electrode in there, and they can shock you and make you angry just by stimulating the anger part of the brain. You don't have to have anything to be angry about. They can just make the mice and monkeys and things like they're not doing it to people too, but we'll pretend like they're not. The mice and monkeys feel something just by triggering that part of their limbic cortex. So anger and then hurt or sadness is what they generally call the blue ones, but these process very differently. Hurt is like what you said wounded me in some way or made me feel hurt, whereas you can be sad about something, you can be sad about Ukraine. It doesn't have to have a personal feel to it at all. You don't have to feel hurt about it, but you can be sad about it. And loneliness is, you can be sad and still feel supported. You can be hurt and still feel connected. Lonely is when you feel completely separated. So those 3, even though it triggers the same spot in the brain, you kind of process those very differently. And so we break them out distinctly so that you can process them. Fear is fear. It's basically that fight or flight cortisol response that most of us are pretty familiar with. Guilt and shame are both the disgust region. They generally call it disgust when they're talking about the 5 core emotions, but we break those out because guilt and shame is I don't like what I did. Guilt is, shame is I don't like who I am. And those are 2 very different processes. You can totally be confident in who you are and still know that, man, I just blew it right there. That's guilt. But sometimes it gets into the level of I don't like who I was in that moment. Like I don't like how I presented myself today. I don't like the person I was. And you process that a little differently when you feel shame. Anger we're all pretty familiar with, and joy we're all pretty familiar with. And I'll touch again, we did last week, but a lot of people are like, why is there only one positive emotion? Why is there, and there is no positive or negative emotion. Joy is what makes you light up when your loved one walks in the room. It's also what makes cocaine amazing. They both trigger that joy center in your brain. All addiction happens because of joy. It lights up that same, part of your brain that being happy lights up. And so, and anger, can be destructive. It's also nothing good in the world usually even ever happens until we get angry. Until we get frustrated with something enough that we're like, things have to change. Like anger is what motivates us to do good as well as we throw at somebody who hurts us. So, and then the last thing we talked about last week, well, we talked about a lot more than this, but the last important thing is secondary emotions, which is really, really important. And this is something that I would love for everybody to think about. as they go through their week. Your secondary emotion is your go-to emotion. Like this is so if someone hurts me and I feel hurt, that makes me angry. And so what I express is anger, even though what I felt was hurt. Some of us, anger is our go-to. And you can hurt me, you can scare me, you can, shame me or whatever, and I will get angry every time. And the part of expanding your emotional intelligence is recognizing your secondary emotions so that you can go back up one step. What made me angry? I got my feelings hurt. That's what it was. So hurt is what I'm actually feeling. Anger is my go-to. Some of us, it's shame. Anything we feel, we trigger straight to, it must be my fault. They hurt me. It must be worth hurting. I'm just an idiot. I shouldn't have done that. Then they wouldn't have hurt me. Some of us is fear. Everything scares us, or makes us feel anxious. So someone hurts us and that triggers our anxiety and our fear. So recognizing your secondary emotion, that your kind of go-to emotion, being able to identify that, and then step back a step and go, wait a minute, I always feel fear. What am I really feeling? That's expanding your emotional intelligence, being able to recognize that there's usually a primary emotion that triggers that. And if you find that, if you spend some time with the emotion wheel, and it's great to spend some time with this once a day, like at bedtime, and go, when did I feel anger today? I felt anger, and it's even best if you can find one when it didn't make sense, like when that dude, cut me off in traffic, and then sit there and go, honestly, it didn't really slow me down. I got to work at the same time I would have. It didn't really affect my world at all. It just triggered anger. Like it happened to me. I felt anger. And then just work your way around the wheel. And if you do that and you're like, I don't remember feeling any of those, just anger. That's probably your secondary emotion, and you could stand to expand your emotional intelligence and go back a step from that. So last week we just kind of dealt with us, just individually, how these are things that happen to us, and the better we can cycle through these and recognize. I mean, ideally, if we were all emotionally intelligent, I would be able to go, see Sean, and Sean doesn't say, see it back, just walks out. And I'm like, ooh, weird. I felt hurt by that. Like, and not like aim it at Sean in any way, and not go, that jerk, is he mad at me? It was just like, ooh, wow, that triggered some hurt in me and a little bit of loneliness. I felt disconnected, and then go on. You gave it language, you processed it, you recognized what happened to you at the limbic level, and then, because our tendency is when we don't recognize those things, we spend all day wondering what the hell is wrong with Sean, because we don't process that just happened to me. Yeah.
I ask myself that question at least once a day.
Yeah, the more emotionally intelligent we get, the more we can recognize this is something that happened to me, like, and it had nothing to do with Sean. Like, it just, like, something in our exchange triggered this emotion in me, and I can recognize it, I can name it, and I can process through it. And then it doesn't have to control my behavior, because that's the weirdest thing. We, especially as believers, we have this, we're not to be driven by our emotions. We're to be driven by faith and by, knowledge of Christ. Our emotions can lie to us. Like, we're given all these negative things about emotions, and so we try to stuff them in a bottle, in which case they generally start steering the ship. That's when they really start to run things. We call it cyclone or cycle. You can either cycle through emotions or you can wait for them to cyclone. It's totally up to you. And the more we do that, I will not be controlled by my emotion, I will not be driven by my emotion, the more they start to totally overwhelm us and come out at unexpected times and affect. And part of that is because we're living in that cognitive dissonance of trying to pretend like we're not experiencing something we're experiencing. And so the hope of emotional intelligence is that you get, this sounds weird, you get more emotional so that you can act less emotional. So you recognize what you're feeling, you're like, and even to the point that you can go, like, I understand nothing you said, was meant to make me angry, but I triggered anger for some reason. Like I'm feeling angry. I'm experiencing anger right now. And the other person will be like, oh, that's interesting that you're feeling that, which is what we're going to get into next, is how we connect over emotions. So last week was just how they happen to us, just a single person, who we are. And this is a great thing just on your own as well. When did I feel these things? When am I feeling these things? What's my secondary emotion that I automatically go to when I feel something else that's uncomfortable? And you can do that completely on your own. This week is more about how we connect over those things, like how emotions connect us, and especially in relationship. And part of that comes down to identity. Like identity is this part of us that recognizes it's being seen. Like that I have a place in the world, that I know who I am, and that this person sees me and recognizes me. And most of our connection, especially when it comes to identity, happens with our emotions, because they are such a gigantic part of who we are that we try to pretend like it's not a part of it. We try to pretend we're rational people, but we're hugely emotional creatures. And when someone sees that and recognizes that, that's why every single one of us, if ever we're hurting and someone meets us in that hurting, we are now best friends, like, period. Like, it doesn't matter, because they saw us, and, like, they saw a piece of us that we don't even always see and recognize that's there. And it feels amazing to be seen. It feels amazing to have someone see you and know you. It's one of the reasons why I really believe in confession. Something about sitting down with somebody. We all know we can confess straight to God and He will forgive us. We all know that, but something about telling someone, hey, I blew it, and them saying, like, I see you, and according to the scripture, you are forgiven. There's something powerful in that. There's something really powerful about confession and forgiveness. I mean, I'm almost to the point of Catholic on that one, except for the fact that it has to be a priest that does it. I believe in the priesthood of all believers, and I think any believer can say, hey, according to the authority of Scripture, you've done what you're supposed to do. You've confessed your sins, and God is faithful and just to forgive you. You're forgiven. And I think that's a powerful thing, because we're being seen in our guilt and shame, and we're expressing our guilt and shame. I blew it in this moment. And someone else is seeing us in that, and that gives us a deep sense of identity. Someone else sees me. I exist. Like a piece of me that I wasn't even sure was real. It's ethereal in my head somewhere, is now out and concrete, and someone sees it and recognizes it. And that is a connecting moment. Anything that gives us identity, that gives us the feeling of being seen, is connecting. And that's how we connect. And so in relationships, the more we can, and in a supportive environment where people kind of know how this works, the more we can communicate our emotions, give them language, and articulate them, and someone else can see us in that, the more connected we begin to feel, because they are seeing us as we really are. And that gives us a sense of identity. So the kind of trendy, funny cliche they use is get on Amazon and buy an extra large boo, because that's the right response when someone shares their emotions. Like, ooh, oh, you can pick your phrase. Not necessarily. And the one thing, the poison word, the one word you never say when emotions are involved, is why. Why? Because why is not an appropriate thing for emotions, because you didn't choose your emotion. There wasn't a why. It happened to you. And so when you're like, ooh, when you said that, I felt like that made me feel like lonely. I like separated better, because I never feel like lonely. That's what I think of when I think of lonely. But separated, I feel all the time. Like something in our relationship just separated. And then what's happened is that emotion of loneliness just triggered. Something in that lonely region of your brain just said, ooh, we just separated. Like, we're no longer connected the way we were. We're no longer seeing each other the way we were. And so when they say something to you and you're like, ooh, that made me feel lonely or like separated, the response is never, why would that make you feel separated? Because you're like, I don't know. It's just what happened in my brain. Like, I know we weren't like we're still talking, I'm still here, I'm still touching your leg. Like, that's what I used to do to Esther, like, I'm still touching you. How can you feel, lonely, or like if I'm right here, trying to talk her out of an emotion that happened to her that she doesn't really have full control of, well, any control of. And so the best thing you can do is when someone shares the emotion they just experienced is, ooh, tell me more about that. What's going on there? Something like that. Oh, tell me about that. What did that feel like? And you can, and usually if you can articulate, I don't know, like it just made me feel sad, and like you were going a different direction than me. Like, and the more they can articulate what that was like and why never works, because there is no answer to that question. As much as it feels logical, when someone feels something that you don't, because you didn't feel it. That's the funny thing, is you say something, we talked last week about this, as Esther and I were doing what I thought was a Bible study. I studied something out, and I came to bed like, tell me if this tracks, and I'm talking through it with her. In the middle of the Bible study, she burst into tears and ran out of the room. And I was like, what just happened? What were we doing? And we were kind of debating a little bit, which, makes me excited. Like, it makes me feel joy when we debate and challenge each other, and not Esther. And so she, and of course, because I didn't experience the emotion, why is the only question that makes sense? Because I'm like, I can't even come up with a reason why that emotion would come into play in this moment. So of course it seems rational to me to ask why, but to her, as it was happening, the emotion happened. And so there is no answer to the question why. And so we stay away from why. We lean into, ooh, tell me about that, what's going on there. And that is how emotional connection starts to happen. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what's going on there. What am I missing? What did I, and the more they can begin to articulate that, the more emotional intelligence expands. And so relationship-wise, I'm going to give you the magic words. You guys ready for the magic word? The way to be right in every single discussion in relationships. Does everybody already know these words? Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
You got it. That's the one.
You should start there. Yeah.
No, the magic words, especially once someone understands how emotions work, are I feel. If you use those words, you'll never be wrong. And no argument is I feel like you're attacking me, a wrong statement. They don't even have to be attacking you. And if you say I feel like you're coming at this a little hot, it is an accurate statement. If you will learn to communicate I feel, rather than why are you always attacking me? Like why do you always have to do everything? And that's another key phrase, universal words. Stay away from universalism. Any you never, you always, every single time, those types of words are never ever right. They're always wrong. Did we talk about the toilet seat last week? There's a thing. There's a great thing on confirmation bias that's demonstrated with the toilet seat. A husband and wife sit down in a counseling session, and she goes, he never puts down the toilet seat. And he's like, what are you talking about? I always put down the toilet seat. And they have an argument using universal language, never and always. And the reality is, she only records the up toilet seat. Never once does she walk by a down toilet seat and go, oh, he put it down. No, she's just like, it just has to be down. Like, she only records when it's up. And so in her recording, she's accurate. He never puts down the toilet seat. The only reason he leaves it up is because he forgot. And so it didn't get recorded because it was forgotten. But he does record all the downs. And the only reason he wouldn't record the up is if he had thought about it, he would have put it down. And so the ups get missed, the downs get recorded, and she only records the ups. And so they're both absolutely right in their own perception, that he always leaves it up. No, I always put it down. But they're both using absolute language that is almost always false. So, and this is something Esther and I used to struggle with back, because Esther used to go to absolute language, and being a turd, I would immediately go, I can name you 5 instances when that's not true. You always say this. Okay, 10 minutes ago, I said this and this, and this, which none of those were what you just said. So I clearly don't always say this, which is where the way our fights used to go. That was a lot of fun. And so yeah, universal language. We avoid universal language. Always, never, every single time. Those are completely destructive to connection. So the more we can say, in this moment, I feel like you always do this. Or even better, in this moment, I feel like this is kind of your go-to. Like, the more we can get away from that universal, you always, with our kids, with our spouses, with our coworkers, like everything, the more we can stay away from, because ultimate language, universal language, is almost never accurate. Well, it'd be rare for it to be accurate, ever. So the more we can avoid that kind of language, stay away from you nevers and you always, the better. And we use those magic words, which is I feel. I feel is the way that you can communicate truth without risking, the weird plane of my perception versus your perception. And so this is, in that feel, there's a really powerful nuance you need to hang on to, because sometimes we mix up I feel with you made me feel. That's not accurate either. Nobody can make you feel. Feelings just happen to you. So you made me feel angry is not the right phrase. I feel angry in this moment, like something in that triggered anger in me, is appropriate, but you made me feel like it's blaming, somebody. Because sometimes that almost like indicates intention, like you made me feel, almost like they intended to make you feel, and every single one of us know we've hurt some feelings not intending to, or we've made someone angry not intending to. Like, and so in that moment, you now have a problem of you made me feel, which communicates a level of intention on my part, and me knowing I didn't intend to. And so now we have a breakdown in the connection that's rooted in semantics. When you can quit the you made me feel and go, I feel anger right now. That's the emotion that's happening to me. And then you've got, when you can articulate that, then it's easier to gain the control to either go, maybe we shouldn't have this conversation right now. Maybe we put this off for a minute because I'm feeling anger right now, and I know it's probably not the appropriate emotion to this moment. It's probably not going to get us anywhere. Our big one, when Esther and I are arguing, and if it goes too long, I hit a point where kind of shame and anger are kind of the two primary emotions I start to feel, and the go-to like comebacks that start hitting me are either, some shame statement, I just suck at this, I don't know why, blah, blah, blah. I know I'm a terrible father, something that I know is not going to facilitate the discussion at all. Like, I know that's not going to help us solve this problem for me to pity party. Or the other thing I feel, it honestly feels like a pick card, like I could go either way, is, come back, well, yeah, well, half of it's your fault, with an anger response. And usually now, and I kid you not, I can't find another thing to say. Like, everything I want to say either falls into one of those two categories: pity party or fight, and so usually what I communicate now is, honestly, I'm in that place where I'm feeling shame and anger, and we should probably put this off, because I can't come up with anything that's going to facilitate the discussion beyond this. Like, until I can get out of these emotions, we're not going to get anywhere. And she recognizes that now and knows what that means, and she'll, I see you, I understand that's what you're feeling, and we may even schedule a time to talk about it. Can we do that this evening? And I'll say yes. And because I know I'm feeling something that's not appropriate to the moment. We both want to solve this problem. Anger is not going to solve this problem. Shame is not going to solve this problem. And yet they're there. I can't deny them. And burying them is not going to help, pretending like they're not there. So I process them, I name them, and and she sees me in them, and she acknowledges that she recognizes that's what I'm feeling, and we admit that that's not going to help in this moment. And she's learned to say that too. Like, I'm triggered. That's her word. Like, I'm triggered. It doesn't just mean like teenagers. Like, I'm triggered or whatever. Like, with her, it means I'm in my high cortisol fight or flight. I'm experiencing fear. Fear is the name of it. I'm in my fight or flight. I want to run. I want to scream. And so I'm triggered right now. We probably shouldn't do this. And I recognize that. I see her in that. And we try to move on and find a better time to do it. So cycle or cyclone. That's the big thing. We can either choose to cycle through our emotions, recognize they're there, learn to communicate them, learn to connect around them by being seen in who we are, which gives us identity, that somebody sees me in this moment. And if we don't, then our emotions tend to cyclone, and one of the guys that the doctors that Esther and I've actually talked to wrote a book kind of about this, and we kind of asked him, like, so how do you process a cyclone when you're in it? He's like, what do you mean process? No, you just hold on and pray you make it out the other end. And like, really, there is no, once the emotion storm is going, you just kind of wait it out. Like, there is no, that's the whole reason you cycle through your emotions, and you try to see them, and you try to recognize them, and you try to verbalize them, and stay out of that cognitive dissonance, is because the more you bottle, the more you trigger these highly destructive, cyclones are destructive. Terrible things can be said, people can be hurt, et cetera, et cetera. So the more we can cycle through, be seen in our emotions, the more identity we get. And obviously learning to stay away from universal words, because they're never helpful. Okay, so that's I've got more we can get into if we want to shift gears, but any input on that? Any of this new to anybody? Everybody pretty comfortable with it?
It goes under a heading I used to see, chemistry is random, but the love of righteousness has to be deliberate. And that's not new to me, but believe me, it isn't real.
Okay, say that again.
I kind of felt like most of the stuff that you're saying, like cycle on the fly.
Right.
That's huge. I've had to adapt and use that a lot. But what I use, just a phrase that I use to remind myself of how to process stuff consistently in the right way, is chemistry is random, but love or righteousness have to be deliberate.
Yeah.
And I have to be deliberate about stepping back and taking a righteous picture, not making assumptions. Like, one of my worst habits has been assuming the worst. If there's some kind of collision where we're not, I literally just, the Lord's told me before, stop assuming the worst.
Yeah.
I'm lost in a lot of emotion and periods of times. So,
Yeah.
chemistry, the emotion, in other words, the chemistry, they're kind of a,
Yeah.
I call it chemistry because it's almost an innate thing that pops out, but it's good or bad, it's random.
Yeah, and it really is. And that's the thing is we assign, and this is the weird part, we assign almost a morality to our emotions. Like, we'll get angry at something and then we'll feel guilty about that. Like, I shouldn't have gotten angry, blah, blah, blah. Like we have any control over that. And part of emotional intelligence is recognizing that emotions happen to us. I mean, that's probably the biggest, oh yeah, good point, Teresa. They're not picking up your voice, so I'm going to sum up. Might feel weird here, but it's for the people online. What's that?
I said, that's what you should call, but she can't hear me.
Yeah, Brian just said that he's got a go-to phrase. Chemistry is random, but love and righteousness are deliberate. And that recognizing that that all these things can happen to you, and you really don't have any control, but you do have control of how you love and whether or not you choose to do the right thing. Sum that up, okay, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for Teresa for bringing that up. So a huge part of this, a huge part of learning to process your emotions is somehow taking the weirdness or the almost morality that we attach to it out of it. And especially with our littler kids, because we act like getting angry, is a sin. We tell them to go clean their room, and they, I don't want to clean my room. We're like, don't you talk to me like that, like somehow that was a bad response. The way you just felt was terrible. And somehow learning to them, like, I understand you're angry, and that's a good thing to feel. Sometimes when someone tells us to do something we don't want to do, that's the feeling that happens to us, but we still have to do that. So the anger is appropriate, or at least the anger you don't have any control over. I don't know if appropriate is even the right word, but the anger is okay, because that's what happened to you. That's the feeling you felt when I told you to do that. But that doesn't change the fact that you have to do that, that you have to control yourself. But somehow we, like, don't you get angry at me? Like, we talk like the emotion itself is bad. And we all kind of have that, like, pretty deeply wired in us. Like the emotion has whether or not it's appropriate, and emotions aren't appropriate or not appropriate. They're what we feel, and emotional intelligence is learning to recognize that. And the more we recognize it and can process through it, the less we're driven by it, and then we can start to make decisions, especially in our relationships, where we're like, it's so much healthier for us now anyway to go, this discussion is definitely triggering anger in me, and we both know if I don't acknowledge that and make some decisions accordingly, that we start yelling at each other. Like, that's when the anger, unrecognized and articulated, then starts to drive the discussion. And the next thing you know, you're screaming and yelling, which every single one of us rationally knows is not productive. Like, we all know this gets us nowhere in terms of actually solving the problems that we both want to solve. We both recognize this is a problem. We both want to be connected to each other and love one another well. And we both know yelling accomplishes none of that. And so, not that, conflict accomplishes things, and we need to have differing opinions that we bring to something and recognize we're not always going to see eye to eye, but it's when the emotions in that moment, and a lot of times, at least for me, I can say, that triggered, separation in me, like loneliness, and Esther will say, and really, I'm sorry to an emotion isn't necessarily appropriate, but we both use it a lot because it just comes so naturally. Really apologizing for making someone feel an emotion is nonsensical. You can't really make them feel. It's just what happens to them. But our tendency is still to go, I'll say, "Ooh, that made me feel lonely and separated." And so I'm sorry, that certainly wasn't my intent, And sometimes just hearing her say that is enough. And then when she says that, we're connected again, and we can continue. And if I hadn't said that, then we proceed in this discussion with me feeling separated from her. And so even though what I feel like is I'm not going to be driven by this emotion, I'm being driven by this emotion. Like, our discussion is now, has this third member of loneliness, like shaping the way I talk to her and the way I receive what she says to me, and it changes. So the only way to act in it sounds so weird. The only way to act in a non-emotional way in the discussion is to acknowledge the emotion, let it be what it is in the moment, cycle through it, and then proceed, now that we both know this thing is here, and this is, especially there are a lot of topics that we've debated over so many times. And, you know, one of them is just money. I hate money. Like, I really do. Like, I wish we somehow just hunters and gatherers, we just got our stuff and didn't have to trade money and do money. Like, in construction, I actually love the craftsmanship. I love the work. I love making things and doing things. And I hate bidding jobs, trying to figure out how much, because I'm always trying to help people out. So I'm always trying to figure out the cheapest possible way I can do it, but still make some money, you know. And that's because I like to do favors and help people. At the same time, I got to pay my bills. And even if we agree on a price and I do it for that price and everything's good, I hand the bill like, I'm sorry, like, here is how much it costs. I hate money. I hate doing that part. And honestly, I don't really stress about money much, even though there's been plenty of times in our life when stress is the appropriate thing to feel. I don't know if it's that I have too much ADD to be able to focus on money long enough. It's kind of like time. It's just the thing that's out there that I don't really relate to well. Or if I truly do just trust God's going to take care of things, because he kind of always has. But Esther does. She has that female security gene, you know, that all females have. Like, I need to know that my bills are paid and I have a house to live in. Like, so weird. I can't imagine thinking that's a thing. But no, but she has that. And so sometimes she has to talk about money. And I mean, now it's to the point where she's like, hey, we need to talk about the bills we have coming up. And I'm like, do I even need to tell you that just triggered a crap ton of fear? Like, whew, I could feel the blood pressure go up. And she's like, I know that triggers fear in you. I see that. And I hate that, but we have to talk about this. I'm like, I know, you know, and it's gotten better now that I can name what this is rather than like tiptoeing, what are you going to show me? You know, like, but yeah, so learning to process it in a weird way, even though it feels like you're opening up your emotions to have their way, it's actually the opposite. The more you open up.
Processing.
What's that?
Like, what does that look like on a practical level, processing? So for me, I'm a person who can name my emotions, and generally what I tend to do if I get really upset, I tend to withdraw, and then I think about it.
Right.
Because I want to know what I'm feeling and why before I respond, usually not always, but that's usually my go-to. But the thing that I've noticed about me I don't think I'm processing.
Okay.
I can name my emotions, and then I validate that emotion, and I live there.
There you go. Okay.
And so it's almost like I can foster or like
Yeah.
my argument later when I can come back and I have, you know, a 5-point argument of why I'm corrected in how I felt in that moment.
Right. Okay.
So I don't know that I'm processing the emotion, but I can emotionally, intelligently
Name
that
it.
emotion.
Yeah. Okay. And even defend it.
Yeah, so maybe
Yeah.
on a practical level, what would processing
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that.
and being able to leak that.
Okay, for the video or anybody online, I don't know if you heard Jess, but she asked, what does it mean to process? Because she says she has a tendency to take her emotion and kind of mull it over and even start to defend it and grow it as she thinks, and so that she can articulate, you know, all of that. And so what does it mean to actually process? And so first of all, the first step for me anyway, and there's some research to back this, is to analyze, maybe, I think it's a word, what that emotion feels like in your body. It's a mindfulness training. I feel fear in my neck. And I have a tendency to like check my pulse because it feels like it's thumping out of my neck. Like I can feel fear. Esther feels it as a tightness, almost like an asthma attack or like she's being choked. And so emotions generally have a physiological effect on our body. Most of us know what it's like to start to get angry, and you can, like, and it's almost like the Hulk tapped into it a little bit, like, you don't want to see me when I'm angry. Like, you can feel like that, almost like you're swelling, and I've heard people talk about, their fingers getting cold when they start to feel anxious, when like anxiety, their fingers start to go numb a little bit. Like, different people have different physiological effects to their emotions. And so part of how you start to process is recognizing, is you take a minute and go, what am I truly feeling under here? And second, so number one, it can be really good because a lot of times we don't separate the event from the emotion, and they are separate. They are totally separate. There is the wrong of the event. Let's say someone does wrong you in some way, says something hurtful. There's the wrong of the event, and then there's the emotion that made you feel. And those are two totally distinct things. And separating them, as much as you can is part of processing it. You know what I mean? Because I'll give you a for instance, somebody you don't know, total random stranger driving down the highway flips you off.
Oh, the guy at Walmart today called you the B word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually triggers anger. And it can be incredibly offensive. The act can be both pointless and undeserved. It can be pointless and undeserved and vicious. And usually, it'll trigger anger, blah, blah. And 30 minutes later, it's a funny story. Like, some jerk, like, just blah, blah, but you're not really like feeling real anger anymore. It's just a story you talk through. And yet, your spouse can say something like, yeah, well, you're acting just like your mom, which might even be a true statement. And 3 days later, you're still angry. And which usually means two things. Number one, there's a truer emotion underneath that you haven't acknowledged. Because we know anger over something vicious and undeserved went away fast. And yet this statement that might even have a little truth in it won't go away. Usually it means there's an underlying emotion that hasn't been acknowledged yet. Fear. What if he's right? What if I am turning out like my mom? That's terrifying, and I don't want to acknowledge that. Hurt, because that was a really, really mean thing to say. And lonely, because he said it while he was walking away, and he left the discussion, and that felt separating, like he just left me with this bomb to think about. And so usually, as you, the more emotional width you can bring in and recognize all the other emotions, if there's one that you don't want to acknowledge, you'll usually hold on to your secondary emotion to cover it. So in that situation, let's say if it is fear, like, oh my gosh, what if he's right? And you don't want to face that question, you'll stay angry, because anger protects you from acknowledging that fear. So the more you can, I guess, recognize that was an inappropriate thing to say, it was a terrible thing to say, and it triggered my anger. And the only way to process those two things separately is to, and this is where we get into meta, so this is fun. So, you may have familiar with metacognition, metacommunication, any of the big metas. You know what a meta study is in science or sociology or anything? Okay, so if you ever read like a meta study, all that means is they took 10 or 12 or 20 or 100 studies and combined all the data. They didn't actually do any new studies. It just means a study of studies. So we studied a bunch of studies because any given study only deals with the data in their study. And then a meta study is when they pull all those data from multiple different studies and go, what can we learn from all these studies put together into, and find correlations based on all these different studies. Because when you're studying the reaction of mice on something, you don't want to look at all the other studies that did the same thing because it might skew your study. So you kind of very intentionally only focus on your data so that you don't get a bias. And then when they do meta studies, they pull it all together. Using that same concept, meta communication is learning to talk about how you talk. So and metacognition is learning to think about how you think. So it's not just the act of thinking, it's the act of thinking about how I reacted, So part of the way you process when you're having trouble letting go of an emotion, so you experience the emotion in the moment, and then it won't go away, even as you acknowledge it and name it. Once you recognize what's happening in your body, and kind of acknowledge, this pit in my stomach or whatever is not going away. So clearly I haven't processed that emotion. Usually that's how I didn't say that part, but the reason you want to find your physiological responses to emotions is because they can tend to tell you when you haven't let go of that emotion yet. And so if you tend to get a pit in your stomach when you're angry, or you feel nauseous or whatever, or your hands feel tight, or whatever your response to that emotion is, it gives you a way of knowing. So the next day, when you're still thinking about that response your husband made, and you're still feeling that physiological thing, you haven't processed the emotion yet, and you're probably not ready to think about the event yet. Because as long as you're thinking about them together, or thinking about that event while you're still in the emotion, you're going to come to the same conclusion you came to the whole time. So you're not really thinking about the event yet, you're just experiencing the emotion still. And so that is in essence, your signal as to whether you've processed. And then you metacognate. You think about the way you think. And so instead of going, was it appropriate for them to do that? Was it appropriate for them to say that to me, to act that way, for that person to do those things? You go, wow, what is it in me that responds so strongly when they do that? Because, like I said, that guy can flip me off on the highway and I forget about it 30 minutes later, and that was totally unprovoked and mean. And this, won't go away. I still have the pit in my stomach. And usually that's when you start to uncover primary emotions. It's because I don't like feeling separated from them. When they do that, or I feel sad. For me, a lot of the things, when I look back at, especially stuff when I was younger, that something now can still trigger, something happens and it makes me feel like that stupid teenager, blah, blah. I start to recognize, when I think something in me hasn't acknowledged that it makes me sad that I didn't get what I needed in that moment. Or, it makes me sad, and I'm bringing that sadness into this discussion and not processing it, out. And so every single time we get into this place, I respond the same way, and I feel the same thing. So what's going on in me that I do that? And so that's learning to think about the way you think. And in a sense, until you have, and obviously we don't always have time to do this, because some situations need to be sorted out. They're time sensitive and they have to happen. And we can't just, go, we're not going to talk about this until I process through these emotions, because, well, that bill's due tomorrow, so, hopefully it doesn't take you long to process. But yeah, the more we can, sorry, catching up on comments. To think about an event that happened, which is objective. In other words, it happened, and there's no, what happened, can't be changed, and that's an objective event, is is very different than what you think and feel about that event. And so until you can kind of separate, okay, that makes me really, really angry. And if you're wanting to come in with a 5-point plan about why that made you angry, then you're in the why question. And that can't be answered anyway. So the more you can recognize something in that exchange makes me angry. And in the process of meta communication, this is when it gets really powerful for relationships, is when you can reach a point, and you can only reach this as you process that something in this always makes me resort to these emotions, these particular emotions. So we need to find a different way to do this, because I can't seem to avoid going straight to anger every time we try to do this. And so we need to talk about the way we talk and find a new way to discuss this, so that hopefully we can avoid this danger zone, which is a little bit about what I was saying with Esther, of being able to go, hey, I'm in my spot where I'm going to go pity party or all out, knock down, drag out fight, and it's unproductive at this point. Like, that's meta communication. Let's talk about the way we talk, and realize that something in this discussion has brought us into a bad place that's unproductive. So I would be interested to know in your situation, if you were able to, or in that situation, not your situation, like you always do that. But in that situation, if you were able to name that emotion in the moment, and be seen in that emotion. In other words, this is triggering anger in me, which it always does, and Matt or whoever else is involved, we're able to say, I recognize that's what you're feeling, and if we need to change up, we can. I wonder if it would be that hard to process after that. Because if it's the event that in your memory continues to trigger that emotion, then there's probably some other things underneath that need to be acknowledged. But I'd be interested to see if you process it on the fly and name it and kind of bring it out and you're seen in it, if it would be quite as powerful.
That's the other question. How do you communicate those things with someone
Who
who's not?
doesn't have this language? Yeah, Jess just says, how do you communicate this to people who don't have?
Like, because I can see how you can say, that's really making me feel angry or disconnected. Then people will take that, even if you're saying I feel, will take that as
very personally, yes.
Yeah, as you're making, turn that into you're making me, and you're blaming me.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we are talking about a new language here, and you can speak French to someone who doesn't speak French all day and not communicate. And that's the bummer. Is part of the power of this, and part of why we call it Relationships Rewired is this is more than just personal kind of emotional intelligence. This is about creating a community and relationships that speak this language, that can connect over their emotions and through their emotions. But yeah, unfortunately, we all have a lot of connections that aren't that don't speak that language, and unless they were to take the time to understand those things, yeah, it's tough. And the best you can do is come home after discussion. And it's honestly, with us, it really does help if we process it together. If we get out of our heads and into our language center, because a lot of times we feel like thinking words is the same as saying words, and it's actually not. Which is why, incidentally, neurobiologically, the ooh is so important. Is because just listening and saying something, even nodding, doesn't. When you say something verbal, it lights up a whole different part of the brain than lights up in any other context. So it actually is really important to go, oh, I hear that. Tell me more about that. What's going on? Because that engages a whole other part of the brain when they hear a real response. We're wired for words, and it engages our cerebral cortex, our language center better when we say something. And so, so sometimes coming home with Matt or a friend, yeah, and we call it downloading or dumping or whatever. And the more you can use specific language, and this is where we get into the classic conversations of guys and girls, guys, girls will come home from work and this happened, that happened, this happened, and she said this, and I said blah, 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 and the guy's like, you want me to call her? It's like, what? Yeah, why are you trying to fix it? No, that's not what I need here. The guys are the fix it, well, quit your job. If you don't like it there, quit. Find out there's lots of other jobs. And you're like, what are you doing? Like, that's not even what we're doing here. And part of that is because females tend to have easier access to their limbic cortex than guys do. We're brain damaged. You guys all know that, right? And it's actually true. You have synaptic fibers that connect the two sides of the brain. And at a certain point of gestation, it's about the same time the testicles are formed when the male fetus gets its first wash of testosterone. It actually burns out a whole bunch of those synaptic fibers. And so men tend to think one or the other, emotional or logical, which is why fights happen. Because guys are either logical, or when they go emotional, it's like all the way emotional. And girls are like, how is punching each other going to solve anything? And guys are like, I don't care. Someone's going to die, because they can only think on one side or the other. So if they're on the logical side, they're the ones going, why are you so emotional? Because women can do logic and emotion at the same time. And the guys are like, why are you so emotional? Because they're clearly sunk in their logical side. But when a guy goes to the emotional side, it's all emotions, no logic whatsoever. It's, I'm going to ram his car, or something completely stupid, completely illogical, because the old, cliche is the women's like a computer. She can have 3,500 windows open at a time, and a man is a filing cabinet. If I want to get in a different drawer, I have to shut this drawer, open this drawer, one thing at a time, which incidentally in relationships is why men can think about sex no matter what kind of day they've had. It's like shut the day drawer, open the sex drawer, I'm there. And women are like, I have 3,500 windows open, you got to close before I'm even ready to think about that. And it's very different. But yeah, so it is actually super healthy. As much as guys give women crap about that, it would be much better for us, if instead of stewing on the anger that we experienced at work, to come home and be, my boss said something totally triggered anger and a ton of fear. And so I've been kind of dealing with that all day, and, I see that, tell me more about that, what went on, and be seen in those emotions. And it's better as women do it more naturally. They also tend to go to universal language in some of those moments, rather than saying, he said this or she said this, and this is what it triggered in me. They'll be like, she's always gossiping around the office, and she's always doing this, and she's the meanest, and she's the, they, rather than recognizing, that all is what it is, what's really happening here is what I'm feeling about it. And that's what I need to process with somebody, is that, every time I talk to that person, I don't even want to know.
Rebecca will come up if we need it.
Yeah. So anyway, we're closing. We're closing in our time. My advice with this: two things. This is a great exercise with spouses and super good with kids. And what's crazy about kids is they do this naturally when they're born. Like when they're little, they have no trouble letting you know what I'm feeling in this moment is anger, or I'm afraid, or like we're wired this way. We're wired for these things, and we learn to do it wrong. Like we learn to not give our emotions their space. We learn to not acknowledge and name them, and bring them into the moment. We're coded and wired for emotion, which wires us for connection. It's one of the ways we connect with kids. They get sad, and we immediately come in and like, what's the matter, buddy? you know, and we connect with them over that emotion. You know, you know, when they feel joy, it's hard not to feel joy. When a kid is giggling, who doesn't laugh with them? Like, you don't even have to know the kid. There's memes of just kids laughing. I laugh every time I watch them. I don't even know that kid, you know, but it makes me laugh just to hear them laugh. We connect over these things, and we're wired that way, and then we grow up and we learn to get away from our original coding. We get away from our original wiring. We feel like emotions are bad. I have to control those. I have to keep those buried. I have to shove them in a bottle. I have to do whatever. And that's where a lot of our problems come from. But we find out when we act more like kids and we bring our actual emotions into the moment, especially into the relationship, that we find it really easy to connect over those, much easier than it is to connect over trying to be rational, you know, logical human beings. What's that?
So it's like Jesus said.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the Bible says that all over the place.
God belongs to such as these.
Yeah, exactly. So, so what I recommend with these spouses, this is hard but super healthy. Is takes about as long as brushing your teeth, and should only take about as long as brushing your teeth. Go through your emotion wheel today, at the end of each day, and try to find in your day and communicate when you felt each of the 8 core emotions. I felt anger today when this happened, which also made me a little sad because it made me feel like it made me recognize that they, you know, this was going on. And you won't feel all of them. I rarely feel hurt. It's just not something I experience much. When I do, I'm able to name it immediately. So it's like you may not be able to access all of them, and you may have to rename them. We were sharing this with a married couple we were counseling, and he was like, "I'm never lonely. I love being alone. Like I don't even know what that feels like." And I was like, "You're never in a discussion with your wife when you feel totally separated from her?" He was like, "Oh, all the time." I was like, "Then change the word. Quit calling it lonely because to be alone and to be lonely are 2 very, very different things. Some of us love alone time, but we hate feeling lonely. You know, I mean, Esther's what I call a relational introvert. She needs her space, but also really needs deep connection and people. You know, the introvert extrovert, I'd break it into 4. You have the relational introvert, the non-relational introvert, and the relational extrovert, the non-relational extrovert. My dad is a non-relational extrovert. He could live in the mountain with a dog and he'd be fine. Like, he does not really need people. And yet, which is always weird for me because he's so kind of detached at times emotionally, and that he goes to a party and he's the most charming person in the room. He just walks around like, "How you doing?" And I'm always like, "Holy crap, he's got great social skills. What in the world? Like, where did this come from?" Because he's he's extroverted. Like when he goes to a party, he's not the person because he's non-relational, but he's not the person that stands in the corner like, "I don't like talking to people." Like, he goes up and talks to everybody, just makes his way around the party. "How you doing? How you doing?" Very extroverted, but he's a non-relational extrovert. He doesn't really need people, but he's good with people. Esther's a relational introvert, so she's never the one to just walk up and "Hi, my name is," and just start the thing, but she deeply, deeply needs connection and people and relationship, and so she needs to be alone sometimes. She hates feeling lonely. Like if I feel disconnected from my people, that's like a terrible, terrible, terrible feeling, and needs to process that, but loves being alone, and so. I forgot what even got me on that. Somebody help me loop back.
You talked about the person who needed to have disconnected instead of lonely.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Ethan, right?
Yeah.
Ethan and Austin. Totally not fair because those are way too close. And I get them swapped all the time. Maybe like Bob and George or something like that. Ethan and Austin feel too close to me. Anyway,
It wouldn't matter what name it was.
yeah. So sometimes you have to rename them, to recognize what it feels like when you experience it. But every night, sit down with your spouse and try to do this. Try to recognize when you felt these things. and articulate them, and see if you don't feel connected over it. There's, and half the times it feels like a goofy exercise you're motoring through, and then your spouse will say, I felt really sad today when such and such, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that's huge. I'm so sorry that you felt like, and you'll find these moments of like real and deep connection over your emotions. And with kids, it's brilliant. I mean, the more you can, because they have no clue and no language for these things. They feel them and they express them very, very easily. And the earlier they can learn to name them and learn to, we're just starting to play with this. The earlier they can learn to name that, what am I experiencing here is anger, and then move on from that, from I can feel that, and know that I'm feeling that, and name that I'm feeling that, and not act that, is a crazy powerful thing to learn at a young age. And then, the more, even though, unfortunately, we can't teach people this language on the fly, you can hear from them their emotions more easily the better you get at this. And so they'll say something.
We started doing that already. We were like, Matt and I were like, oh, that person's secondary.
Yeah.
Lie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the more, especially in dealing with coworkers, employees, things like that, the more you can start to notice their go-to secondary emotion, and that, they respond very differently when they are in a fearful response. When I come in a certain way and I can see fear in them, I get a very different response than when I come in a different way and I don't trigger fear in them. And there's a lot of power in how you can deal and work with people. Be much better. It's a really fun and beautiful thing when you're in a group of people who know this language and you're able to communicate it, and they can see you in that, and they can see you in your emotion, and you feel identity in that, and you don't feel weird or guilty for being angry or whatever, and don't feel like, oh, if I get angry the whole relationship's going to be broken, and the fact that you can go, wow, I felt a lot of anger when you said that, and that person engages you rather than pulling away from you. Like, that's the thing we're always afraid of, right? If we show our emotions, it's going to ruin something. It's going to break something. If I show them that I disagree with them, or that I'm angry that they said that, or that or whatever. If I show that, man, the relationship might suffer. We might not even be friends anymore. It might be broken. And the more you can basically be honest with what you're feeling, and I feel anger, and they actually engage rather than pulling away, it's an incredibly empowering and connecting thing, that you're like, oh, you actually do love the real me. Because that's that's that old saying, our to be fully known and fully loved is our heart's desire. It's why we draw to Christ. Like, to be fully loved when you're not fully known is sentimentality. And we all have that, yeah, but if you knew me, you wouldn't love me thing, right? That you only love me because you don't know the stuff I hide. And to be fully known but not fully loved is our greatest fear. That if somebody knows me, they won't love me. And the more we can begin to be authentic with what we're feeling and what's going on inside us, and in that, somebody engages us in that rather than pulling away, it's a beautiful thing. It's what love starts to feel like. So, any other questions, comments, anything? I keep telling myself I'm going to leave room for conversation and discussion, and then I look down and go, man, I talk.
Just that a lot of this is biblical.
Yeah, it really is.
A lot of the stopping to check yourself and talking to yourself about things.
Yeah, and I kind of brought that up in worship last week. David saying, why are you so downcast, oh my soul? Like, that is crazy insightful psychology that was thousands of years earlier than psychology recognized that your you know, that there's two brains, and that sometimes you have to talk to the other one that doesn't have language. You have to tell it, you know, what to do. It was crazy that David caught that.
Is he the one that, and I don't remember if it's David or not, there's a short section where he's talking about the new man and the old man battling. And
That's Paul.
Dissonance.
Yeah.
That's Paul. Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to look, I didn't think it was David.
Yeah, Romans 7 has a fun breakdown that I used to do between the new man, old man, and you know, I replaced the words, the things that I do, I don't want to do, and blah, blah. And I put new man and old man where it was appropriate, and it reads super cool. But yeah, there's a lot, like, the Bible seems to have been really comfortable with the weird duality in the brain forever, you know, and science is just now catching up to that in a weird way, like, which is always fun. What is that smile? You have that weird.
I'm sure you don't want to know.
That I came up with the Cliff's Note version of something from earlier, and it's making me kind of giggle. And that's I can just open a drawer, but I have to help her close windows before she'll drop her drawer. And that's what that look is right there.
Yeah.
It's always been thinking about for
Next time you say, Jess, next time you say you don't want to know, I'm going to take your word for it.
I mean, you really should.
It just popped in my head, and that's why all of a sudden I started holding back giggles.
Did the people online get to hear that?
I hope so.
You want to summarize?
I will.
Summarize for the people at home. That's a lovely shade of blush you're wearing.
I don't even care. I'm just.
Well, the whole argument is like you're becoming just like, you know, you're becoming just like your mother. Christmas, the obvious elephant in the room. What's the matter with my mother?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Is your mom online?
What's that?
Is your mother online?
I don't think so. If so, she didn't jump in the chat bar.
You should apologize.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to have like a million mother-in-law jokes. The bummer is I got a great mother-in-law, so I can't like use any of them. Which like I was like dying to get a mother-in-law just so I could use all the nasty mother-in-law jokes, and then I got a really good one, so none of them are appropriate. Okay, well I'm gonna go ahead and pray so we can at least let these people log off, and then if we want to hang out and eat more and chat more, we can. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for the way you've made us. And it's almost embarrassing how often, with all of our great technology and great tools and great learning, we find ourselves coming back to what you said in your word thousands of years ago. And so help us to put confidence in what you say because we know it's true. Even when we don't understand it, we know it's true. And we know that someday we will. And so I pray, God, that you'd help us to be whole, to be integral, to have, to be one person, not two people, to give voice to the way you've made us, spirit, soul, and body, mind and emotion, and that they're all tied together, and we're at our best, and we connect best when we bring all those things to play. And we ask especially that, Lord Jesus, through your life, death, and resurrection, you would redeem us and restore us in all those places, spirit, soul, and body, mind, emotion, and body. And that you would be at work in all of those things to make us more like you. Pray that you connect us well to one another, because that's the heart of your gospel, to love God and love people. And all we want to do is to learn to do that better. So we ask that you do all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Always fun. What's wrong with my mother? That's a good one.
Do you guys want to sit around and talk about what's wrong with our spouse's parents? This sounds like a fun can of worms.
Yeah, you guys don't know
Oh, this sounds.
I know Brett's mom. Yeah, you know Brett's mom. I got tons
I
of
got this
stories.
mental picture after a certain point going too far in the wrong direction. My shovel's getting smaller, the file's getting deeper. You're gonna have to use the same shovel, you know, see where it's going.